Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, I'm Rob Rose and welcome back to another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. I know we've been telling you this for a while now, but it's nearly here. 10 weeks away from a new NFL season, so we're starting to dig into some more of those storylines that give hope to every NFL fan that maybe their franchise can find that magic mix of pieces that can take them all the way. But as well as those who are feeling optimistic, we know some of you out there are maybe a little concerned that your team are putting too much faith behind a player who might just regress. Somebody overhyped, overpaid, still playing on former glories, and we're going to pick out which players and which teams we think are in trouble. So, for our picks, I'm going to hand over to JB, PB and Aldrin and get on with the show. Hi, gents.
Hi, Rob.
Hello.
So back together, and another topic that we're just plucking out of thin air with a lack of NFL news. And this week, we're going to cover those NFL players we believe might be overhyped, maybe in danger of taking that backward step and regressing in a 2021 season where their teams are relying on them to do anything but. But before we get into the meat of that topic, Phil, it is over to you for Quiz of the Week.
Welcome to Phil's Quiz of the Week.
Thanks, Rob. So another 10-question quiz this week, but we're going to go multiple choice. So we'll shout them out as we go along. We'll quicken it up for a change this week. But James, don't shout them out until I've read the question and the listeners have time to think. So as we're on a Zoom, put your hands up when you know it, and I'll go to whoever I see first. So question 1. The NFL was the third of the major sports leagues to be founded. But what year was it renamed to the National Football League? Was it 1922, 1899, 1946, or 1917? A few seconds for the listeners to have a think of that one. So when was it rebranded as the National Football League? 1922, 1899, 1946, 1917. Aldrin, you had your hand up first.
I think 22.
1922 is correct, straight off the mark. 1 for 1. Good work, team. You're playing as a team today.
Okay, good. We might get all 10 then.
You never know. The first Super Bowl was played in 1967. What team won? Was it the Chicago Bears, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Green Bay Packers, or the New York Giants? That's the Chicago Bears, Kansas City Chiefs, Green Bay Packers, New York Giants. JB, you had your hand up just before Rob.
it would be the Green Bay Packers.
Green Bay Packers is correct. I thought that would be an obvious one for you guys to get. Question 3. Which of these teams has the fewest Super Bowl wins? The Dallas Cowboys, the New England Patriots, the Green Bay Packers, or the Pittsburgh Steelers? So which of these teams has the fewest Super Bowl wins? Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, Green Bay Packers, Pittsburgh Steelers. JB, you've got your hand up, but you look unsure.
I think it's the Packers again.
Correct. It's 3 for 3. So the Steelers and the Patriots are tied for most with 6 each. The Cowboys have 5 and the Packers only have 4. They won 6 championships in the 60s, but the Super Bowl didn't begin until 1967. Question 4. Losing count. The NFL formed with 10 teams from 4 states. Which of these teams joined the latest? Was it the Chicago Bears, the Arizona Cardinals, the Green Bay Packers, or the Miami Dolphins? So which of the 10 teams joined last or the latest? Was it the Chicago Bears, Arizona Cardinals, Green Bay Packers, or the Miami Dolphins?
Dolphins.
It was the Dolphins, correct, 4 for 4. There are only two teams that in the NFL that have been around since its founding, which are the Bears and the Cardinals. The Packers joined, when it founded in 1920 before it was rebranded. The Packers joined a year later, but is the oldest franchise that's never moved locations. Bit of trivia for you there. Question 5. What NFL team has the most Super Bowl losses? Buffalo Bills, New England Patriots, Minnesota Vikings, or the Green Bay Packers? So which NFL team has the most Super Bowl losses? Buffalo Bills, New England Patriots, Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers.
As we're working at a team, if one of us gets this wrong, can one of us have a go so we still get it right as a team?
Potentially, yes. I'm going to go to Aldrin first. I think you were first there.
The Bills, isn't it?
No, the Bills is wrong.
Oh, there you go then, JB.
It's the Vikings.
Also wrong.
Really?
Yeah.
Please, Rob, save us.
I'm just going through the Patriots ones. 85. And then the two losses.
The Bill Parcells Patriots lost to the Green Bay Packers, didn't they?
Yeah.
Mike Holmgren's Packers. They've lost to the Giants twice.
And the Eagles.
Eagles, which makes 5.
Yeah.
I think the Vikings are 4 as well.
Who was the other one? I've only got Bills, Patriots, and Vikings written down.
Bills, Patriots, Vikings, Packers.
Yeah, I think the Patriots then.
You're correct. They're actually tied with the Denver Broncos with 5 Super Bowl losses. So the Patriots have won 6, lost 5. The Broncos have won 3, lost 5. Bills and Vikings have both got 4 losses each. But obviously the Bills are the only team to make the Super Bowl 4 times in a row and lose all 4. So we got there in the end. I'll give you a third of a point for that, I think, because it took to the third guess. So question 6. There have been several NFL relocations in the past 25 years, but what is the newest NFL team to join the league? Out of these 4, was it the Houston Texans, Baltimore Ravens, Carolina Panthers, or Tennessee Titans? We'll go to Rob first as he got the last one right. Texans, Ravens, Panthers, Titans.
Well, out of those, it's the Texans, isn't it? I'm just checking my knowledge of the Cleveland Browns becoming the Cleveland Browns again.
But that was 99.
99. So yeah, the Texans, yeah.
That's right. So of those 4, the Texans joined the league in 2002, the Ravens in 97, and the Jags and Panthers both joined in 1995. The Texans obviously replacing the Houston Oilers after the Oilers moved to Nashville and became the Tennessee Titans. So we're going well with good guns, 6 of 6. The coach who has the most career wins, another easy one. Coach who has the most career wins also coached the only NFL perfect season. Was it Chuck Noll, Don Shula, Bill Belichick, Marty Schottenheimer?
It was Don Shula.
It was Don Shula. So a dozen teams have won multiple Super Bowls. What team has won the most in a row? Was it the Green Bay Packers, New England Patriots, Dallas Cowboys, or all of the above? So which team has won the most? And it might be more than a dozen teams that have won the Super Bowl now, by the way, but we'll gloss over that. What team has won the most in a row? Green Bay Packers, New England Patriots, Dallas Cowboys, all of the above. JB?
All of the above.
All of the above is correct. Won 2 Super Bowls in a row. No teams won 3 in a row.
Cowboys and Patriots won 3 in 4?
Yes.
3 in 4 seasons, both of them, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Pats and Cowboys, 3 and 4. Patriots also have the most appearances with 11, as we covered off earlier. So question 9, how long is a point after touchdown kick attempt? Is it 15 yards, 33 yards, 22 yards, or 35 yards?
Sorry, give me those. What ones were it? 15.
15, 33, 22, 35.
See, I think it's 35.
I think it's 22.
I thought
That's been moved back though, hasn't it? It's been moved, but I mean...
You're both wrong, Aldrin. You need to rescue it for the team.
Not 22 or 35. So what were the other options?
15 yards or 33 yards?
I would say 15.
Oh,
33.
33 yards.
I told you it was nearly 35.
Come on, gang.
Honestly.
There you go.
So you've currently got 8 and a third out of 9. Still good going. So last question. What team won Super Bowl 10? Was it the Miami Dolphins, the Oakland Raiders, the Dallas Cowboys, or the Pittsburgh Steelers? What team won Super Bowl 10? Miami Dolphins, Oakland Raiders, Dallas Cowboys, Pittsburgh Steelers.
The Raiders.
Wrong.
So we're taking it wasn't the Steelers and it's not the Raiders.
So the other three options, Dolphins, Cowboys, Steelers.
Is that Steelers?
Got to be the Dolphins.
Point.
Is it the Dolphins?
Dolphins is wrong. Which team won Super Bowl 10 for a third of a point?
A third of a point, and who's left?
For a whole point. Dallas Cowboys or the Pittsburgh Steelers?
It's not the Steelers. This is an outrage. Or if it is the Steelers, it's an outrage.
Rob, Dallas Cowboys or Pittsburgh Steelers, Super Bowl 10 winner?
I thought the Steelers, but I'm obviously not. I don't know. I'm doubting myself because how would I know that and other people on our call not know that?
The problem is other people on the call who might have known that may have misjudged what year Super Bowl 10 would have been because they can't count backwards.
I'll go Steelers because if it's not the Steelers, I don't know.
Super Bowl 10 was held in Miami in 1976. The Dallas Cowboys were the losing team, 21-17, beaten by our good friend James's Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Pittsburgh Steelers is correct.
Absolute outrage.
When I did the maths, I got to 77, and not.
I mean, the rest of us all know, when our team's won the Super Bowl. I know all the Bucs Super Bowl wins. I'm sure Aldrin knows all the Colts Super Bowl wins, and I'm sure Rob knows all the Cart. So that was quiz of the week.
All right, Dr. Phil. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. That was Phil's quiz of the week.
Just 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10. Good work, team.
I think that's all right. That's not bad.
It is, and just if anyone at home or on the podcast was counting, that would be 1 correct answer by Aldrin, 3 correct answers by Rob, and 4 correct answers by me.
Yeah, nobody cares. You didn't get your own team, JB. You didn't get it right. Rubbish.
Maths are hard.
Just know that it's Super Bowl 10, man.
This is hard.
Can't be perfect, can we?
Full of life lessons this week, aren't we? So nicely, I don't know if that feels like a success or a failure. I don't know. Do you feel like we won at Quiz of the Week, lost at Quiz of the Week? I don't know. I feel deflated that we struggled so close to the end. 33. I'd have felt better if we'd have got that 33 yard.
It was a strong start. A strong start, and then it died a little bit, but I think you did all right.
I think the quiz of the true quiz of the week was the friends we made along the way.
And the answers James has now learned.
Yeah. Quiz of the week was presented by the number 10 and the letters J and B. So with that then, chatting about overhyped, regressing players that NFL franchises will be relying on in the coming season. We've all been scouring our notebooks and the famed journalistic opinions of the internet to bring you our own personal insight, and tradition dictates. Aldrin, I'm coming over to you first.
So for this week, I had almost a player for every team, I think, because there are so many players that this kind of theme can apply to. And then I narrowed it down between 2 wide receivers, and in the end settled on the one that I think this team is going to be leaning on the most and has probably paid the most for what I can't see as being the return on investment that they're hoping for. And the player that I've gone for is Corey Davis of the New York Jets. And I think the big thing for me is obviously the Jets having the 2nd pick in the draft. They went out and got Zach Wilson, and, in hoping that he's going to reach the hype on his own, and he might be another one that doesn't live up to the hype. But in trying to give him the weapons around him, I feel like Corey Davis just isn't the player that they need. I think they kind of brought him in and are expecting him to be a wide receiver 1 in a team, and just in a performance set that I've not seen him suggest that he can be a wide receiver 1. I think last year was his kind of breakout year, as you often see with wide receivers that are going into, big contract years or who are looking for big money. But so his breakout year was 65 receptions, 984 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, to me, that just doesn't scream wide receiver one. It doesn't scream, the unbeatable wide receiver that kind of unit probably needs. And it just, again, feels to me like they've pinned their hopes on a player exceeding the kind of talent that they have. And it kind of brings me back to where they ended up with Sam Darnold in, not really putting the top players around him and then wondering why he didn't perform very well. And I kind of feel like we're in a similar situation with Corey Davis in that, I don't know, I can't see him producing 1,000-yard season. I can't see him catching 10 plus touchdowns. And I just feel like, they've gone out and given him that kind of wide receiver one moniker. And I do not see it. I didn't see it in Tennessee. I don't see it now. So yeah, he was my pick out of what was a fairly lengthy list in the end. But
so in our pre-pod discussion, you'd hinted at having a couple of wide receivers that you could potentially talk about here. And Corey Davis wasn't one of the ones I think I was expecting, but having just kind of pulled the stats up, yeah, I think I can kind of see where you're coming from. If we look at stats there, he's played a full season once in his 4-year so far NFL career. He played 16 games in 2018, where he had 65 receptions for 891 yards and 4 touchdowns. Talking about him being a player that's going to catch you 10 touchdowns in a season, he has 11 career regular season touchdowns. So catching 10 would nearly double his thing in 1 year. Looking at the setup that the Jets have, we are looking at a quarterback room that is currently James Morgan, who I believe was drafted by the Jets last year in the 4th round, Mike White, who was drafted by the Cowboys in 2018 in the 5th round, and Zach Wilson, who was drafted this year by the Jets with their, was it the second or third pick? Zach Wilson's going to start. He's going to be the starting quarterback for the Jets, because if he isn't, they haven't got a lot of hope behind him right now. And all of those kinds of things add up to like the wide receiver core around him. I think Jamison Crowder is better than some people give him credit for, but I don't think he's necessarily a number one. So you're right in saying they'll probably be leaning on Corey Davis to be that, partnered up with like Keenan Cole, who they've got from the Jags. Not really got an incredible amount at tight end. They've not got anything that's making me excited at running back. The only kind of counterpoint that I would have is obviously we've seen Corey Davis coming from that Tennessee Titans offense, which is especially for the last couple of years has been exceptionally run heavy. It has been all about Derrick Henry fueling the engine that makes the Titans go. And when it's not, you get a lot out of Ryan Tannehill with those short passes with that play action, which isn't necessarily set up to go to your primary wide receiver like a Corey Davis would be. So I think judging him based on what he has performed before versus how he'll perform now is a little bit unfair, because we maybe haven't seen him in the right setup. But yeah, he doesn't look like he's going to a place that's really building him up for what he needs to do.
The only other thing I'm going to touch on really is the salary that he's on. So his average yearly salary is $12.5 million. Now that only puts him $2 million behind Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams and Jarvis Landry. And that for me just kind of suggests, massively overpaying a player that isn't going to reach the heights of any of those guys ahead of him, let alone anybody else. So
I'm less down on the move. I mean, I think if you're the Jets, and I mean, we did an early podcast where I predicted a path to the playoffs for the Jets pretty early on, and how the world has changed since then. I think the Jets are very much looking like a team who, with a new head coach, are going to rebuild and reload and kind of start again. And the only thing I suppose is, yes, they've paid him a lot of money. I mean, it's one of those things that bad teams often have to pay free agents a lot of money. There's the other element about just how much did he benefit having a better wide receiver across the field from him and, Derrick Henry. Henry and Brown are thinking in Tennessee gave Corey Davis a great opportunity to make those yards up last season. The only thing that makes me kind of not feel too down on this as a move or too down on Corey Davis is that wide receiver room without him looks incredibly ordinary. It's not like they paid Kenny Golladay money. I think of the few that were available, he's not maybe the one that you'd have, thought would be paid $12.5 million. But I think he makes the Jets better. And I think for me, if you were talking about wide receivers, I'm curious as to who your other one is, actually, because I think of, players like Odell Beckham Jr., for example, who is on an absolute king's ransom up in Cleveland. And you just mentioned Jarvis Landry, who I think is the guy that makes that offense tick when it comes to their passing game. So I don't know. Is he going to help the Jets do anything spectacular? No, I don't think he is. I think he is a player who could look pretty ordinary pretty quickly when he's the main man, as you were describing. But from the Jets' point of view, there are. I'm not going to say there are worse signings they could have made. I think it would have been worse to make no signing at all. I think when you're rebuilding and when you've got all that cap space in a young quarterback, sometimes I don't mind a swing, even if it ends up being a swing and a miss. But I will say, if he can keep up that Tennessee form, if he gets 900 yards and, what was it, 4 or 5 touchdowns last season? I mean, that would be transformative to the Jets, if not quite enough to propel them to be competitive. So, yeah, I'm kind of on the fence, but I can see why you picked him out. Who was your other one, Aldrin?
My other one is the guy that perpetually doesn't live up to the hype, Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, never has.
The other slot receiver that wants to be a wide receiver one, and funnily enough, isn't. Odell Beckham Jr. was also on my list as a team that, as a player that team could do without.
It's funny that you bring up Juju, really, because I think if you look at Corey Davis's trajectory, he's arguably got more upside in his play than Juju Smith-Schuster. And obviously they're both just Corey Davis has gone elsewhere and kind of got a bumper deal, and Juju's, taken a bit to stay home in Pittsburgh, and hopefully he's banking on himself having a good year and I guess making more money next year, and we'll see what happens. But, Davis is still reasonably young. He's been solid, if not spectacular, for 3 years in Tennessee. I think he's going to the Jets. He'll be a focal point of their offense, you'd imagine, that he arguably wasn't in Tennessee. So actually, I would have almost gone the other way and picked him as one of the ones who could break out of the free agent signings, rather than, one that's overhyped and overpaid and not going to pan out. So, yeah, I disagree with you on this one. I think Davis to the Jets, assuming that, Wilson comes in and pans out at quarterback like they expect, and I can see a good season coming up for Davis.
I think that really is the reason that I picked him, though, because I think the Jets are hoping that he lifts the franchise and he's, the new wide receiver one for the next 3 years of that £37 million deal. And I just think you end up overpaying a wide receiver too, ultimately. And I think they've done, that's the thing for me, is I think the Jets have done that plenty. Overpaid a wide receiver two to be a wide receiver one over the last few years, and it inevitably led to Sam Darnold not living up to his potential and moving on. So that's kind of more where I'm coming from, is that, don't get me wrong, if you brought in Corey Davis as a wide receiver two at a Tampa Bay or Pittsburgh or somewhere like that, he would be a perfectly brilliant wide receiver two. I just think leaning on him as a wide receiver one leaves you wishing you'd gone and got somebody else.
Can he block well enough to play for the Buccaneers?
That is the question. But that's my only thing, is that I just think they end up with a £12.5 million a year wide receiver two, fronting wide receiver one positions. So that's it.
So nice. Aldrin, I like that. I like that as a start point. And I know you've gone wide receiver. JB, I believe from a pre-pod chitter chatter, you're going running back. So who is the overhyped player that a team is relying on? Put us out of our misery.
Yes, I am going to go running back because as it turns out now, after Aldrin's bit there, I don't have time to go and look up a player from each of your teams to horrendously slander, as you have all just slandered the great name of Juju Smith-Schuster, who I confidently look forward to proving all of you wrong this coming season.
I look forward to TikTok dances and no touchdowns.
We'll see. We'll see.
I would be, don't get me wrong, I would be quite happy for Juju to light it up and, to watch on as he performs in the Super Bowl in a loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
So for my player, I am sticking in the same city, technically, as James Aldrin, but going to the other team that plays in that stadium. I am looking at those New York Football Giants, and I am expecting a disappointing season from their would-be star running back, Saquon Barkley. And I look forward to everybody arguing with me about this one. I have two reasons for this. One, Barkley only played in 2 games last year before tearing his ACL. That is quite a critical ligament in the body, especially if you're an athlete. So expecting him to come back week 1 from that and play as the player that they think he is going to be, it's going to be quite a lot. But it's also, I have doubts about that Giants team. I think there's going to be a lot of expectation that Barkley is going to have to run the ball a lot in order for the Giants to do well. And to do that, it means they're going to have to place obviously a lot of the workload on him. And for a guy that tore his ACL last season trying to be that workhorse, I think there's a lot there that can possibly go wrong. Also, personally, kind of look at Barkley's performance, Barkley's stats. He was hailed as this once in a generation running back, like a transcendent talent that was going to transform a team. And his stats have been good. He's the first rookie in Giants history to go for 1,000 yards in both of his first 2 seasons, 1,300 in the first and just over 1,003 in 2019. Now, that was a sort of an abridged season. He only played 13 games out of 16, but he still made it. However, for a pick as early as he was to have those kind of levels of performance, to me, is a bit of a disappointment that people maybe aren't looking at in that way. And I think expecting to kind of roll out the red carpet to, Barkley the Destroyer with 17 games is putting the cart before the horse. I think there are bigger problems with that Giants team that he's not going to solve. And I think because of that, he's going to suffer in terms of his output and performance.
You were waiting for the queue of people to disagree. So I'll kick that off and I'll make it brief. If Derrick Henry's the best running back in the NFL, then a fit Christian McCaffrey is probably second. And I think a fit Saquon Barkley is third. I think he is absolutely brilliant. Now, I get your point about the Giants. We talked about this a few weeks ago. If Golladay doesn't work out and Daniel Jones to Golladay doesn't work out, I mean, that's really their big swing on the other side of that stadium. Then Barkley has a problem. It's a bit like the Adrian Peterson days in Minnesota when they had Christian Ponder at quarterback. If a lot of the passes are short, you're going to have a very busy, very crowded box that he's got to make his way through. That said, I think bar health, I think he's as talented a running back as there is in the league. Your point on health is valid. I mean, running backs need to start fast in an NFL career that can often flash and be incredibly short. But no, I have Saquon Barkley right up there. And I think if Saquon Barkley was on the market right now, 31 NFL teams would be asking what they'd need to do to get him. I think he's still a top tier talent. I think maybe he hasn't quite taken the roof off yet, but I'd go as far as to say I think this year could be his year for that.
I mean, I'm quite happily next in the queue to bash James's choice. I just think your points would all be valid, JB, if you were talking about last season. I feel like this year they've done a lot more to put players around Daniel Jones in that offense that mean that Saquon doesn't have to be running the ball all the time. Don't get me wrong. I think they're still going to lean heavily on him because the guy is an absolute stud, as Rob said. But, I think they've added Carl Rudolph. They've added Golladay, we've already talked about. They even added John Ross. Do you remember him when he used to run really fast in a straight line? So they've added weapons around that offense that I think take away the need for Saquon to be the focal point. I get your point about where they drafted him, but equally that's not his problem where they drafted him. The guy is ultimately a running back who we know the reasons that people don't take running backs early doors is because they do end up in positions where they're going to get hurt. So I think health is an issue, but equally, I think that's part for the course, really, when it comes to running backs. They are going to get these sorts of injuries. And I just think, I think the guy can probably only exceed expectations because of, he's maybe not done as much as he'd like. But I think that, in an offense that isn't quite as reliant on him, he maybe gets more running lanes and he gets a bit more freedom. So, I still think the guy's sensational talent.
Yeah, I probably agree with these two, to be honest. I think he, Joe Judge and Jason Garrett had 5 quarters with him last season before he went down, absolutely no time at all. And we've talked on earlier pods about how weak that division is. And in hindsight now, if you think about it, the Giants almost made the playoffs apart from that, dodgy Eagles loss to Washington in the last game of the season. And they did it without the focal point of their offense, without a real, solid running back. They didn't have a great run game last year. They bought Deontay Freeman, towards the end of the season. So I think Barkley coming back is going to make a massive difference to them. And the other pieces that they've put around as well, I actually think the Giants I would probably pick them as maybe now, in hindsight, picking them as potential division winner. But yeah, I don't think he's going to stumble. I think the only concern would be his fitness. If he's not, if he gets injured again, or if the leg's an issue, then there's potential there. But I see him having a strong comeback season.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would keep saying about the Giants is this is a massive year for Dave Gettleman, because you have the feeling that Dave Gettleman has made, some controversial picks. I mean, if the Saquon Barkley pick is controversial in your eyes, JB, then God knows how we'd rate the Daniel Jones pick, and the disbelief when they, put that name in. But equally, I just feel that Dave Gettleman has gone out, spent the money he needed to on Kenny Golladay. Yeah, a tight end in Rudolph. I mean, I think he's probably got a few durability questions over him, like any tight end really at this point in his career. But yeah, I do feel like Gettleman's gone out and got what he wanted. He's paid the big money for the free agents he felt they needed. He's gone and picked the people in the draft that he really thought could make the difference. So if it doesn't work this season, I don't think it's the end of necessarily Saquon Barkley's NFL experience, but Dave Gettleman might struggle after what Carolina are now here. I mean, some really good flashes during that time as a GM, but I think Gettleman has definitely, what is it, nailed his colors to the mast? Is that the phrase I'm looking for? And I think that could be one of the most interesting stories in that division in the year ahead. I think, like you say, Judge, people seem to have him still as a young and interesting coach. Have we really seen enough? Has he had the pieces to be able to show what kind of head coach he is yet? Whereas Gettleman, I think, with all of these big moves, has ultimately done something very different to the Jets. Rather than buying time, I think he's built expectation. So, it does makes for an interesting story. And if everyone's happy for me to pick up the mantle and go next, then I'm going to stick with the running back theme. And I have a two-pronged issue with my next one. So I'm going to pick the Las Vegas Raiders, who I think are already a wildly unbalanced roster with questionable personnel decisions, one of my big issues with the way they operate. But actually, I'm going to pick a player I really like in Kenyon Drake. So when Kenyon Drake was at the Cardinals, you would hear me do nothing but scream for that guy. Actually, far better than people give him credit for catching the ball, particularly out the backfield. Contested catching, maybe not so much. A great up and down runner, loves running, out wide or really finding those gaps between the tackles. And you know what? His season last season for the Cardinals was unspectacular, but solid. But, and here's the but, Kenyon Drake is not as good a running back as Josh Jacobs. And if you are bringing in a guy to be ultimately the bell cow in that offense, this is the guy you're going to hand the ball off to 75% of snaps, why go spend that money? I just don't think the Raiders really needed him. I think other teams did. I mean, the Cardinals maybe needed him more than the Raiders. And I know money talks and he's now in Vegas. But for me, Joshua Jacobs is one of the most exciting finds out of that really odd kind of personnel operation that they have up there. I think the guy looks like a superstar in the making. And I think, injuries, again, we've talked about this, which running back truly avoids injuries through their career. But I think he's had a few spells on the sideline, a few things that haven't quite worked out for him. But as a runner, he has a brilliant change of pace. He's a true multi-speed runner. He'll slow down, wait for gaps to develop, really intelligent with the ball in his hands. When he needs to absolutely turn it on, I think that change of pace is utterly brilliant. And then he's just got great football brain, great hands again. And this is the kind of guy that you'd think they'd be thrilled. And that just makes this whole thing about Kenyon Drake doubly odd for me. Do I think he's got a season in him, like that half a season with the Cardinals or the flashes before that with the Dolphins? I'm not convinced. I'm not sure he's a bad running back either. But when you've got an okay running back who might be able to do a job for you, keeping a really good running back who could be a true game-changing talent on the sidelines, it just doesn't make any sense, does it? So my overhyped player is that Kenyon Drake is the RB1 in Vegas when that makes no sense to me whatsoever.
So for me, I agree with you in a sense that he's going to be back up to Josh Jacobs, and I think his position with the Cardinals was more of a leading rusher. So I think if you look at it in that sense, then yeah, he's gonna go backwards in terms of his production this season. But I also do wonder whether the landscape has kind of changed a little bit. If you look at, obviously I would speak from a position of knowing more about this, but if you look at the Bucs and winning the Super Bowl last year, and they had Ronald Jones as the main back through most of the season, and then Leonard Fournette, became playoff Lenny and Lombardi Lenny and kind of really lit it up during the playoffs. And I wonder if teams look at that and think, well, maybe having two, really good running backs is arguably a good way to go, rather than having one main guy. And if he goes down, then your running game's a bit screwed, like the Giants, like we just talked about, not so long ago with Saquon Barkley. So, I wonder if that plays a part in it a little bit. But yeah, it's hard to disagree, barring injury, Josh Jacobs will be the guy getting the bulk of the carries, you'd imagine. So I think Drake's stock, for fantasy football as an example, I think Drake's fantasy stock's going to go down. I think his production's going to go down this year.
I think I kind of see where Rob's coming through from with his point of view. I think one of the concerns that you have to have as a Las Vegas Raiders fan is kind of that, and we have talked about this before, the almost philosophical battle between GM Mike Mayock's preferred style of football player and what he likes to build through the draft versus Coach John Gruden's veteran friendly approach of liking people he can trust to run the offense. And it does feel very Gruden to bring in Drake and kind of have him siphon away from Josh Jacobs, just as much as it could be that Drake will go from kind of being the bell cow at the Cardinals to being absolutely nothing behind Jacobs because he never stops. I still think it's a smart pickup. It's not necessarily, it doesn't ring of like desperation, or it doesn't ring of something that you kind of risk on it. Let's say like a team picking up like an aging AJ Green or a Giovanni Bernard, or a team that might roll the dice with a quarterback like Carson Wentz, who necessarily may not have the same magic. Just three random teams with random, potentially questionable players there that I just picked off the top of my head. But I think it's kind of what Phil said does kind of make a bit of sense as well, and just having that kind of double-edged sword and that double punch of being able to go, well, if one of them won't get you, the other one will.
See, I would agree if we're not talking huge money. So Kenyon Drake spent last season at the Cardinals on the tag, right? And we all know how the tag works, right? That average of the best paid running backs in the NFL. And on the tag, he got 8.5 million for that one season. After a really disappointing season where he didn't even win outright the running back battle in Arizona, he's ended up earning 15 million over 2 years with more than 11 million guaranteed going to Vegas. And for me, add that to the fact that 11 million, I mean, God, let's talk the nearer 15 million that he's likely to get. That goes a long way at the moment. With cap space the way it is, you could do a lot with your roster with that kind of money. There are an awful lot of good players available in that 2.5 to 3.5, maybe even 4.5 million bracket. And I think they're paying a backup quarterback far too much money. And what is ultimately going to be a backup running back, far, far too much money. When you look at who's going to be paid more than Kenyon Drake at running back in the NFL, next season, the only people paid more than him are the genuine bona fide superstars. Your Ezekiel Elliott's, your Christian McCaffrey's and Derrick Henry's and so on. That's really strong money for a guy that I think at best is going to be keeping a slightly better player on the bench.
I think just to round out all of your points, I'm kind of in agreement with a lot of them. So I don't disagree, Rob. I do think they're overpaying him to ultimately probably be a backup to Josh Jacobs. I do agree with Phil's point, though. I think the necessity of having a good backup running back is ever more present. I think, Phil talked about it from a Bucs standpoint. I'll talk about it from a Colts standpoint. Last year, we lost Marlon Mack. And, he was our lead back. And then we had Jonathan Taylor there to step up. I think probably the thing that made them make that move is you look at the players behind Josh Jacobs and the running backs that they used last year. You're looking at Devontae Booker, Jalen Richard, and then the next highest rusher was Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota. So, I think there's not a lot of depth there. I think he comes in and immediately makes that running back room better. Do I think that he, can get back to probably the first 2 years of his Cardinals tenure? Probably not. I think I would even go as far to say as he's a guy that's already not lived up to the hype. I think, if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, you probably feel that. I think he never really lived up to what he could do, and his best years were at the Cardinals. So I think, I can see him regressing and not really being much of a part of the offense. But equally, like Phil said, if players go down, he could come in and play an integral part. So I'm a little on the fence with it, just because obviously we talked about running backs, or JB talked about running backs, and, when you lean on them, they do get injured. So if you've got a really solid running back too that can step up, then maybe you put yourself in a better position than most.
I think one point we haven't touched on yet, sorry to jump in, Rob, one point we haven't really touched on yet is the fact that the Raiders have, weakened their offensive line, arguably. So I think that's going to play a part as well. Josh Jacobs looked really good last year, but he probably had a stronger line than they're going to have this year. So how does that impact for him? But also, how does that impact for Drake as well? So it's not like you're taking him out of the Cardinals where he played last year and just putting him into a backup behind a team that had a good running offense last year. Who knows where the gaps are going to be and what that's going to be like this year. So I think that's going to play a part as well. But yeah, I'd agree with you here, Rob.
That's it. I mean, if you can't afford to pay Rodney Hudson and you're asking Marcus Mariota, who ultimately is a good quality, but potentially overpaid backup quarterback, to take a pay cut, who goes and takes all the money you've saved and spends it on Kenyon Drake? You were talking about Marlon Mack there, Aldrin, who's on $1 million a year. I mean, if we're having a chat about the Las Vegas Raiders picking up Todd Gurley for $2.5 million, that's fine. They're paying Kenyon Drake $15 million. I feel like I should have the Dr. Evil little finger by the side of my mouth. $15 million. They're paying him tag money for a guy who was on the tag and didn't. Again, it makes no sense to me, but I feel I doth protest too much. And also, as I jabber on about this, I'm keeping Phil waiting, and we all know how annoying it is to be left waiting. So, Phil, I'm going to hand over to you for our fourth and final overhyped player.
Thank you, Robert. I'd hate to keep you waiting. So for me, you've all picked offensive side of the ball, and I can understand that. And why would I be any different? Well, we also laid into a current Steeler earlier on, which made James most upset. And what I want to do is talk about a player who was probably going to end up looking better with the Steelers than he will with his new team. And I'm going for a player that I think has been overpaid and is going to be another kind of not so good free agent signing by the Tennessee Titans. And I'm going to say that Bud Dupree is going to have a not so good season this year. So the Titans have paid him $16.5 million per season, I think for five seasons. So it's a big contract for a guy who you could argue was getting his best career stats opposite, potential defensive player of the year, TJ Watt. And a guy who's rehabbing from a torn ACL. I mean, this is a big, risky contract when it's literally an injury that happened towards the end of last season, and no one knows, how he's going to recover from that. I think, his agent was probably rubbing his hands together, to be honest, because he probably didn't expect to get such big money over a decent term like that, coming off such a major injury like that. Even going into his fifth year, when the Steelers picked up his option, there was talk of him being overpaid then and maybe not particularly living up to his potential. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think if you look into some of the stats, last season of Dupree's total pressures, 60.5% of them were either unblocked, were clean up, or they were pursuit plays, which aren't necessarily plays, that you can attribute to be a positive of his play. And if you look at TJ Watt, only 26% of his pressures fell into those categories. So your argument is like I said earlier, that Dupree was looking so good over the last couple of years because he was playing opposite TJ Watt. So if you're taking him out of that situation and into a team who desperately need to improve their pass rush, like the Tennessee Titans, he may not be a guy who can create his own situations and make his own pass rush opportunities. And in that sense, that's what the Titans are paying him for. So, I think it was last year they paid Vic Beasley, another pass rusher, $9.5 million. He turned up late to training camp. There was unexcused absences, and he produced so little that the Titans then got rid of him in November. That they bought in Jadeveon Clowney, 1 year, $13 million, and he produced 0 sacks in 8 games and then got a knee injury. And it's just they've tried two other guys that had big names and looked good elsewhere, and then didn't pan out for them. And I think that it's a real kind of high risk or what's the opposite of high risk? It's either high risk or a big bust, I suppose, in terms of how it pans out. If he plays like he did for the Steelers and he comes back strong from that torn ACL, then they'd probably argue that they got value for money if it improves their pass rush and makes them even more of a contender. But, if the leg isn't right, if he pans out and without somebody as good the other side, to help him out affects his stats, then it's going to look like a massive, massive, massive overpay. So he'd be my pick for someone to under-deliver this year from where he's been.
I'm going to totally agree with you. And I think the reasons that you've cited are kind of similar to my thinking with Corey Davis. I think the guy is a perfectly solid player. I think he's done well at the Titans. He's done well at the Pittsburgh Steelers, rather. But I think the points you made are all valid. He's done all right, or not as well as he could have done. But in a stellar unit, TJ Watt, and they've had, some great players like Stephon Tuitt and others that are doing a lot of the pressure work, and he's, been able to sweep up, and even still is not getting massive skyrocket numbers. So, and I think the one the one thing I really agree with you for this pick is that, similar to Corey Davis, they're expecting him to come in and be the guy. You know, they've struggled with pass rushers the last couple of years. They had Jadeveon Clowney there last year, he was another one of my contenders for never living up to the hype. And, you know, they've kind of gone around this year looking for players that can rush the passer, and they picked up Denico Autry from the Colts, who, again, another of those types of perfectly serviceable players, but it's not going to be the guy. And I think Bud Dupree is kind of the name, and obviously with the money they paid him, the guy they're expecting to come in and absolutely smash it up and, you know, get to the quarterback. And I think, like you said, coming off such a major injury and also never having shown that he is the guy, for me, just feels like a real big swing with a real big miss coming for them. So, but enough from me. I'm going to divert to either Rob or our resident Bud Dupree expert, JB.
Well, if I go, because I'll just go quickly, I think you guys have summed it up. I think at best he ends up being worth his contract. I don't necessarily see him, or actually many defensive players, exceeding that kind of money and that level of expectation. It is a weird one for me that actually, if we go back to JB, because I'll use this to segue to you. If we go back to your argument about Saquon Barkley, well, if Saquon Barkley had just been paid, you know, the best part of $80 million over 5 years, I think your Saquon Barkley argument would be a lot more solid, you know, would hold a lot more water. Ultimately, Barkley's there, he's under contract, and I still think he's a talent. To go out and spend that much money on a player who is in a good unit, and not only a good unit, but a historically good unit. You know, this is, you know, the Steelers know how to build a great defense. I just wonder, is that something he can take with him? I like him as a player. I just think it's a lot of money. I think it's probably a bit like we were saying earlier. It's the Titans you put on the hook for this rather than Bud Dupree. But a lot would need to go right.
So obviously there is a part of me here that is sat here in a Pittsburgh Steelers t-shirt as we record this podcast, that is fuming at having to listen to yet more slander and regarding a member of the black and gold. But I think Phil has made a good point. I think if you look at Dupree, going to the stats again, if you look at Dupree's best performing season, it was 2019. He played 16 out of 16, 68 combined tackles, 49 solos, 19 assists, 11.5 sacks, 16 tackles for loss, and 17 quarterback hits. Now, the 2019 season with regards to Bud Dupree's output is important for two reasons. One, it was kind of the first real sign that we got of how dominant TJ Watt as a player is. The absolute best Watt brother in the league currently, and the man that should have been the defensive player of the year, fight me anybody on this podcast, really helped give Dupree that kind of space. And I think there were times that I don't want to be as negative as saying it's mop-up duty with all of the focus going on TJ, but we have seen players benefit from that before. The other important thing was that it was the 5th year of his 5-year rookie contract. It was a contract year, and we could sit here and spend like aim for an hour runtime talking about players who had a spectacular contract year and then never turned it into anything with their other team. We would still have another couple of podcasts worth of names that we could talk about. If you look at what happened in 2020 before the injury, he was on track for kind of a standard performance like he had given kind of the years before. I think Rob's point around kind of looking at the injury, again, like I said with Barkley, I think Phil's point around who he's lining up with for the Titans, like it felt a lot to me like the Steelers on the edge kind of had Batman in TJ Watt and kind of had Robin in Bud Dupree. Now they're expecting Dick Grayson to be Batman, and it'll be interesting to see if he can pull it off.
The Titans just, I I don't know, the Titans feel unnecessarily win now. I think there's probably an argument to say they've put themselves in a good position after, 4 years ago, probably been considered, the type of team we'd now consider maybe the Texans or the Bengals, a long way away from feeling competitive in those days. And it just, I don't know, it feels like there's a bit of desperation from Tennessee. And I was thinking, when you were talking about the black and gold, do you reckon the Titans have that? The blue and the slightly less bluey blue? I don't know. What would the Titans be? I don't know. Cardinal red. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, I suppose. I need to dig into the Tennessee Titans. But interestingly, in rather bizarre Tennessee Titans news, have you heard that the Houston Texans are going to have throwbacks more reminiscent of the Oilers? That seems a bit bizarre. I remember the times when the Tennessee Titans used to have throwbacks and play in the Tennessee Oilers uniform. So a bit of, a bit of history being merged there, maybe fan bases rather than franchises leading to throwback colours. But anyway, I digress enormously. I think that was pretty unanimous. Bud, we hope you have a great season. And we hope you enjoy all that money. I mean, I'm not sure I necessarily need to feel a level of pity for the now multi-millionaire Bud Dupree, who's not only paid for his children to go through college, but his children's children to go through college, I would imagine. And yeah, it all starts bubbling up to what feels like the longest wait for an NFL season ever. I cannot remember off-season or pre-season, wherever we are now. It all just feels so long. But who knows, gents? Maybe we're back in a week's time.
Only 10 weeks to go.
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, it feels like surely we should have news. Surely we should be close to big news now and starting to get an idea. I'm thrilled that I didn't mention Matthew Stafford and tempt fate as a player who is massively overhyped and not going to live up to that next year. Tom Brady, will he survive another full season? I mean, I don't know. This is a guy who just gets older and older in front of our eyes, but somehow better and better. So maybe all these questions will carry over to next week. But for another week in the books, I will say thank you for your company, gents. And we'll come back in 7 days and do it all again.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, all.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.